Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the How Did I Get Here podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Poli. Lots going on with the show these days. We have a star-studded lineup that we're super pumped about. Some housekeeping notes. Please make sure that you download the latest shows on Spotify and on our YouTube channel, the How Did I Get Here podcast. All of that helps out with our algorithm and makes it super easy for Preston to find us some really cool sponsors. Thank you for all the support, all the messages, and all the well wishes. We're going to keep doing it because we're having a lot of fun with it. So let's get right into it. Up next on the podcast is Rachel Lehman from Crema Coffee. I thought I knew something about coffee when we first sat down. And after talking to her, it's just wild to hear what happens from the bean on the tree to the cup in Nashville or any major city. Extremely knowledgeable about coffee. I think we're going to have to get her on again because I feel we have some unfinished business with Coffee Talk. So please enjoy this Coffee Talk podcast. Let's do it. Welcome. Thank you, Rachel, for coming and hanging out with us. You are the owner of Crema along with your husband, Ben. Mm-hmm. And my first sort of question is, and I only asked this because I was exposed to coffee really, really late in life, and I had no idea that there was this whole world. What was your first exposure to really, really good coffee? Like that aha moment?
Okay. I think for me, I had worked in coffee since I was 15. And when I worked with a single origin coffee from Intelligentsia out of Chicago, which was we were serving this in a little cafe in Sandwich, Illinois. Where I grew up.
Sandwich, Illinois.
I remembered not understanding that coffee came from, it was a certain plant from a certain varietal from a certain place. And so just that idea struck me as something as new and that it wasn't as commodified as what I thought coffee was. My first experience with something that kind of blew my mind was, as far as like flavor goes, was drinking a geisha varietal coffee from Stumptown Coffee Roasters when Stumptown was very new and still only in Oregon at the time, in Portland. And again, the traceability aspect of that coffee and thinking that, something could be floral and very complex was just like a new concept to me. So I've been drinking coffee, been exposed to specialty coffee since I was 15. And I'm 41. So it's been a while. But I feel like at different phases in my life, the industry has changed and grown
Exponentially.
So I think the Stumptown experience for me happened prior to Crema. I want to say that was around 2007 when I had that coffee that I was like, this is unlike anything I've ever tasted before.
But you were working in a coffee shop in your hometown?
I worked at a little cafe in my hometown.
Just to make money, never realizing that you're going to eventually, with the dreams and aspirations of having your own coffee shop?
Right. I loved it. I loved the community aspect of it. And then I went to college in Lakewood, Colorado, which is right outside of Denver. And I worked for a small roasting company there that had been there since the 70s. And I fell in love with, again, like the hospitality side of it and the fact that there was always something new to learn. And we did serve single origin coffee at that location. I wouldn't say it's was like the best specialty grade coffee, but this is also late 90s, early 2000s. So it was a very different time. But I did go to like a Specialty Coffee Association event when I was in Denver in 2002 and saw latte art for the first time. Right. And that was when we were all trying to figure out how to do this thing. Before YouTube was the thing.
Sure, right, yeah.
So just learning from other coffee professionals that had been in the industry for a long time. And I really fell in love with making things for people with my hands. And having those relationships with people every day, which is really unique about coffee because people come in way more often as a regular than other hospitality places I had worked prior.
Right. Correct. Yeah. So the coffee shop that in Denver was your first kind of real experience in the food and beverage industry, would you say?
For coffee?
Just like your first introduction to the food and beverage industry?
I worked in an ice cream shop when I was 14, making shakes and sundaes. But I mean, for coffee, yes.
So, but you were drawn to the industry. What I'm trying to get at is, and I'm saying for my own personal experiences, I started cooking because I was exposed to the restaurant industry and I happened to walk into a kitchen. I think that if I would have walked into a dining room and I needed a job and they would hire me as a server, I think my life would have taken the trajectory of being a server. Like I didn't walk into a kitchen saying, I want to be a chef. I walked into a kitchen needing a job and my friends had worked there. So what I'm asking you, I guess, is to flip it onto you is, do you think your first experience in the food and beverage industry was coffee and that's why you went? Or do you think that if you would have got a job at a restaurant, you would be a server or a manager, or you were kind of drawn to coffee?
I was drawn to coffee and I loved drinking it.
Yeah.
And I had friends that kind of got me into it socially, like in college. And so that's what kept me in it. And then the culture around going to cafes and, studying and having like game nights or things like that inside of that culture was just really fun to me. But I really did enjoy drinking it.
Yeah.
And there was always something new happening in coffee that I thought was so interesting. And that's what kept me engaged in that specifically.
Right. When do you think like the coffee revolution happened? Because I can pinpoint like when the beer revolution happened, like the late 90s, early 2000s, you saw it start to bubble up and people were drinking pumpkin beer and there were these small producers and oatmeal stouts and all these kind of things were moving away from at least what things that I had been exposed to, like Bud Light and Old Style. And now there's all these different flavor complex. And if you like this type of beer, there's that. Like, when do you think coffee started to like take on this life of its own and become what it is now?
Yeah. I think that for me, the biggest changes I saw was early 2000s. We were all into drinking lattes, large drinks with syrups. And there was like all new and exciting to have an espresso beverage like created and made for you. And that really took off with the proliferation of Starbucks everywhere.
Correct,
and then you had the second wave of like people that were like, no, I'm going to open an independent shop and I want to do that and reflect my local community. But then I think that as the internet took off and travel became more accessible, people started learning more about where their coffee came from. And so I think that big change for me happened in 2007 to 2011.
Yeah.
That there was another big shift of, oh no, we want to refocus on quality now. And so they call that the third wave. But like, we want to focus on the quality of the craft, really hone in how we prepare that espresso, how we prepare that milk, how we prepare that drink. But also we want to find ways to buy and procure transparent coffees and have the ability to know where these coffees are coming from, how they're being processed, how it affects the farmer's life. And honestly, I think that was because of social media. We have this, all of a sudden you have this explosion of access to people that we didn't have before.
Right, yes.
Oh, I can directly talk to a producer on, Twitter or something or find people and make connections that way. And also I can travel to these countries much easier now than I could have with the cost of flight and travel being more accessible. And so then I saw like post that 2011, there were a lot of big roasters, like big third wave roasters in the country, like Counterculture, Intelligentsia, Stumptown, kind of these big...
after the Starbucks
wave. But then people like me were like, I understood like, hey, we want to have this craft, but also I want the ability to pick the things that I'm now buying and serving. And so then there was a huge explosion of micro roasteries in coffee, I would say from 2012 to like currently now. I mean, I think of how many roasters are in town now and how many of our baristas have left to start roasteries. Back then, 2011 when Crema started roasting, we were 3 years old and we started roasting. there weren't many local options for us. And that was part of the reason I wanted to roast was I want something accessible for us. I want something where we can source the quality we want to source, because I was finding that very difficult to do locally. So I was having to buy a lot of out-of-state coffee, which the cost became prohibitive with shipping. And so,
I mean, shipping destroys everything.
Yeah. And then also we wanted to create a brand. We were like, we felt like it was our turn to figure it out. It was very rough at the beginning, but, figure out who we want to be. What do we want to sell? What do we want to offer to people? You know, we're always looking for really unique offerings, but also we want to have those everyday coffees for people, but we're buying really clean, really honestly kind of boutique in the specialty realm of coffee, which was something that I didn't really have access to. I was kind of at the mercy of whatever roasters were offering.
Sure, right.
When I was in that position. So
you moved to Nashville in 2003 after college? Yeah. Why?
Well, long story short, I went to college in Denver. My husband and I grew up together in Illinois. He moved here after college with some friends. And we were dating. And so I moved here because I was working in coffee, and I was like, well, I can get a coffee job there.
You get a coffee job anywhere. So what did you do from 2003 to 2008 when Crema opened?
I was the general manager at a coffee shop called Sam and Zoe's in Berry Hill.
Right.
I worked for Doug Havron over there. Doug owns Gabby's Burgers and Fries now. He quickly sold Sam and Zoe's after I left. So I ran that place for 5 years. It was interesting. It was one of the more interesting jobs I've had.
Why?
We had a drive-through, we had a food program, and we did it all out of a very small 1,200 square foot dilapidated house.
Wow. Sounds amazing.
It was very very Berry Hill grunge rock and roll, but I kind of loved that about it. Yeah. I actually really do miss that neighborhood because I just met a lot of very interesting people that live and work in Berry Hill with all the music studios in that area.
Yeah. You want to put another pillow behind your back so you can sit back?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
But anyhow,
yeah.
That was the thing with working there.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
Man, you said a lot, and it gave me a lot of more ideas. So before we get back onto when you opened Crema, what was Ben doing at the time? He's super passionate about coffee also.
When we opened Crema, he was working at a healthcare company doing marketing. So he did a lot of...
so training for the coffee industry.
No, he did a more like corporate marketing job for many years. And that's honestly how we were able to support ourselves.
Sure.
So he didn't join Crema full time till we were able to financially make that happen until 7 years in to Crema. Wow. So it would have been 2016.
Well after you guys after you were roasting your own.
Yeah.
So this was you all the way up until he came on board. Wow. And
then now he left working with me at Crema full time. It's been almost 3 years. And now he does flight instruction. He's back doing his passion, which is aviation.
Amazing.
So, but yeah, he really helped with Crema develop our brand and our voice and who we are, and really helped me understand how to better communicate that with the world. And so I'm really grateful for, I would say he definitely has a lot of skin in the game, and he did our build outs. He built out our Duke Street location by himself.
Yeah, I read that, and I know so many chefs like build their own bars, and I was talking with Mark Vetri, and he's like, "Oh, you're opening a restaurant. This is what you got to do. Find some money and some raspberries, and go to a bank and get a loan." And he's talking from the early '90s, just build everything yourself. And I'm just like, I don't know how to do that. And I'm so not even envious, but just in awe of people that are this is my coffee shop, and this is my restaurant. I built everything, and we used refurbished wood, and I was out there at the junkyard sourcing stuff, and I'm just I don't have the bandwidth to do that. And I feel not less of a person, but it's
you shouldn't have to know how to do all this.
I'm cook food inside restaurant guy. I'm not build restaurant guy, or look at something and
Yep.
be like, oh, I could take that part and put it over here, you know?
Yeah.
So hats off to him for building it. And now he's like flight instruction. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's back in a completely different field that he's always wanted to do. Like that was always his passion. And so I'm very grateful for all his efforts. And he's still involved with Crema, just more as an advisory type role, but just grateful now.
Sits on the board.
Yeah. But like truly, he does do more than just that. I mean, he does contribute. And I think like I'm just grateful that he's now able to do his passion because he allowed me to do mine for so long.
Well, you guys are a team.
Yep.
I mean, that's what marriage is a team,
Yep.
you know, supporting each other. I don't have to tell you that. Let's go back for a second to what Starbucks was and what it is now. And I want to hear your opinions on it. At one point, Starbucks was a local coffee shop doing unique things, serving what I would consider like good coffee at one point in its life. Is that fair in saying?
Yeah, I mean, as a company, they proliferated coffee, as we know, like the espresso culture that's now part of the U.S. I wouldn't consider that Starbucks has ever served specialty grade coffee. Their coffee, in my opinion, is more a commodity grade.
Yeah.
But I think as far as proliferating, like what people have come to expect in a coffee shop, I think they set that standard. I think Howard Schultz, I know his story really well. I mean, he obviously traveled to Italy and kind of saw the model there and hoped to bring some kind of community-based business into community, like to offer this place for people to come, but have that daily thing where they can interact and be known, and then also have an experience of drinking an espresso.
He had a very kind of like Italian cafe model to it from what I read also.
And it's changed a lot over the years, from when they first started where things were all made by hand. You know, even the La Marzocco Linea model that La Marzocco makes out of Florence, Italy was designed for Starbucks. It was a high volume espresso machine, and that's the machine we use at Crema. You know, they became fully automatic. They started working through fully automatic machines. I don't know exactly the year. I don't want to be quoted on that because there is a history where that changed. And I know that even during the pandemic and the last 3 to 4 years, that there's been leadership change there, but that they have gone to a more drive-through model. And I think that third space that Howard Schultz was always wanting to proliferate has kind of shifted with Starbucks. And I think that the local shops have taken that on.
There's plenty of room for the local shops to eat that up, you know?
Yeah.
I think of going to Crema and having a meeting or stopping in and sitting down and pondering or doing some work. First of all, I don't go to Starbucks, but I never would look at going to Starbucks and like hanging out there. Also, I don't live in the coffee culture either. It's usually I'm doing something and grabbing and going. But when I do, I want to sit down. I want to have it out of like a cup. I want a barista to actually make it. This is kind of a tangent, but you know, I don't think Starbucks opened up and saying we want to be in every major city across the world as being this kind of chain. You know, the guys from McDonald's, when they started, they weren't like, one day we're going to have a McDonald's in Russia, you know? How do you go from, and this leads into another question about you, is like, how do you go from having one coffee shop to roasting your own beans to then now you have two, where you kind of like, how do you expand so fast but still keep your integrity of what you're doing? Maybe you don't have an answer to that, but
I think I don't have an answer to that. We're opening a location in Brentwood, and it's going to be our biggest one yet. And that is the thing that honestly keeps me up at night is protecting our reputation as a brand, but that customers are getting the same quality and the same guest experience that they can get at our other cafes. And so I think that's through just really making that a priority and a core tenet of who you are as a value system. And that is one of our primary values. And so we do spend a lot of money and time on training with baristas and making sure that that we have the right resources around that, like people we have cafe trainers in each location, we have a lead trainer in their role, and that we don't take shortcuts in the training process. And it's very easy to do that. We also have a bar exam that we make our baristas take before they're allowed to necessarily make drinks for people, that they can at least achieve a certain level of quality. And from there, they can continue to grow as baristas. That's something that I'm hoping to, as we have a little bit more resources with having another location, I want to be able to expand that into like different certification types for baristas, like a level 1, level 2.
Is that something you're just doing, or is that like a common thing?
I would say that it's common in a lot of the companies that have seen success with quality. I would say one company that I admire that has done a good job with that is like Blue Bottle.
Yes.
I would say another one that I have seen do that well is Verb Coffee Roasters in California, and like Cat and Cloud out in California. But the companies that I see doing it well have made it a very primary goal of theirs as a company, and that it is expensive and it's not easy to spend sometimes $2,000 to $3,000 per employee to train them. But we found that the more education that we do and the more ongoing education we have and opportunities allows us to have baristas that have tenure with us, and they tend to stick with us longer. So that makes me excited, and I want people to always feel like they're learning and growing when they're at Crema. So creating opportunities for that lateral growth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think, like, why coffee though? Like, why didn't you get into wine? Like,
well,
were you just kind of drawn to it?
Yeah, I'm more drawn. I do enjoy drinking coffee more than I enjoy drinking wine. Like I like wine, but like, I think that I like the taste of it. I like the ritual of it. I like I
hear people talk about the ritual.
The ritual, like
yes.
the daily connection of it. Yeah. It's something that you can do for yourself. It's pretty inexpensive. If you are on a budget, there's a variety of ways you can get your fix. Right. But like for me, I love the craft of making it, and I love the story of it. I love when I meet and talk to producers about the work they're doing at origin, and then seeing like how complex all those systems are, from agronomy to growing it to processing it to shipping it to then us roasting it to then getting it to the barista. It's pretty wild how many phases and stages it has to go through before it ends up in someone's cup. Right. And I'm always like trying to find ways to communicate this with our new baristas, but I'm like, it's like a window. It's like the coffee starts like this, the quality, and then it just keeps shrinking as it gets to us as a roaster and then to you, the consumer. And I think the thing that's really special to me is when we've had coffee producers come see their coffee served in our cafe, and when they get to see people enjoying their coffee and their work. That's just like I feel so honored to be the person that gets to serve it. Yeah, I'm just oh my God. Like, it's a
great feeling, right?
Yeah. It's like I think that oftentimes the roaster gets overly recognized, or the baristas get overly recognized. And I think it's a culmination of the whole chain of events, which is just unlike something that it's different than wine or beer. Not to say that there's not a lot of complexity behind wine and beer, but at the end of the day, typically you're just uncorking something and serving it, and you have the ability to talk about it. But baristas are actually creating something every day that could have you can pull an espresso one way and have one flavor profile, and you could change up how you grind it or how the brew ratio, and have a completely different experience out of that same coffee. And so it's
like
really,
a living, breathing thing.
Yeah. It's like training, like, I hate to be like little, but it's like it's a lot of palate development and like training like little mini chefs on how to dial in espresso. Even that alone is like a whole, and every day we have to do it every day, check it throughout the day. It's just pretty different than serving wine and beer. Yeah. Yeah.
My coffee journey started maybe like 7 years ago. I didn't drink any coffee until I was like well into late 30s, early 40s. And I was in Copenhagen, and I went and got an espresso coffee collectives or a cappuccino.
Yeah.
And she asked me, what kind of beans do you like? And I was like, I didn't even understand what she was saying. And I'm like, I just wanted like a cappuccino. I said, no, I just want a cappuccino. It's like, no, like what, do you like more acidic flavor or more fruity flavor? And no one in my life had ever asked me anything like that. My experience with coffee was Folgers crystals of what my parents drank. And I thought it was just the most disgusting thing from like being like a 10-year-old child. I knew back then it was like, but I like when you first open it, I like the smell of it. I like that. But I don't smoke, but I like the smell of like a new pack of cigarettes. It has like an aroma to it, you know? And then when you light it up, it's like disgusting. And then when you drink Folgers crystals, it's fucking gross. So she asked me this and I just said, fruity. And then I started to like, being a chef and curious, I started to like explore. And then during the pandemic, I was drinking so much like cold brew all the time, and I got turned on to cold brew, and I think it's just more robust and it's like deep and the flavors are rich. And then I started buying beans from you guys, or we started, you and I started using coffee with some of the dishes at Catbird Seed. And I told you specifically what I wanted. Like, no, we need it to be like this, and you would alter and change, and you'd find us the beans. So it was like a nice little journey, but when I started making cold brew at my house, that's when I knew I was hooked. Because I would like set it up, I'd make it, and then before I would go to bed, I would be so excited in the morning. I was like, I can't, like, it was like 10:30 at night, and I'm like, I can't wait to wake up and drink a coffee in the morning, like come downstairs and like push the button and watch it drip out, and then like, not like excited to drink it, just like, to taste what these beans are going to do. This is like a new bean, and it said it's this blueberry flavor, and you smell it and you kind of get this yogurt flavor from it. And I was like, fuck, I'm a coffee snob now. Like, oh my God, I'm so into it. So do you see that happening? Like if somebody comes in, I've never been a barista before, I need a job, blah, blah, blah. Do you see that process happening of training someone's palate and then that aha moment of like, oh, they finally got it, or they finally get it? Like what is that like?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite class to teach, whether that's for baristas or for the general public, because we do have our public education classes, I love teaching our cupping classes, which is basically like I'm a certified quality control grader for the Coffee Quality Institute. So it means I can actually score and grade coffees just like you would with wine.
Sounds serious.
It is actually. There's 32 sensory tests you have to pass to get your certification.
Wow.
And I have to go back every 3 years to be calibrated.
So you're a coffee sommelier.
Yeah, basically it's a sommelier for coffee. So Winston, our roaster, did it first and then encouraged me to do it. And I felt like I don't have the palate like he does, but I did pass, which is kind of crazy. But when I teach that class, and it's our control in coffee for evaluating a coffee, I know that a lot of times it's easy to underestimate people's ability to smell, and sense flavors and taste and aromas, but we know that like aromas and smells are tied to the limbic system in the brain, which give us like that aha moment for like memories and like where memories are stored. And so it's like, oh, this reminds me of like my grandmother's perfume, or there's like a very strong, but it's interesting when I teach that class and I go over the section for aroma. It's like people, when they start smelling the coffee, they immediately notice differences and they're able to speak about it and talk about it very easily. And they may not be able to say like, oh, well, this is, this fragrance here is lemon and this one is peach, but they might be able to say like, this smells fruity, like a stone fruit, or this one smells like citrus. Like they don't have to be very specific, but a lot of times they can immediately identify chocolate, nuts, citrus. And they can, especially when you start to do comparison tastings or cuppings, they almost always pick out the differences. Yeah. And everyone has their their preference for what their personal preference is, what they like, but it's always very cool when we go through the whole thing of, we smell it dry, we smell it wet, we break the coffee cup, and then we let it cool and we start to taste for the different elements. acidity, flavor, balance, body, aftertaste. People always have something to say about those elements. And when people start to get it and they're like, oh my God, I never knew coffee was so nuanced and could be so different from each other. I usually do 3 different cups on the table to not overwhelm people. But that is always my favorite experience because people are just always surprised at their own abilities. But I'm always just like, yeah, when you stop and take it in and like think about what you're tasting and talk about what you're tasting, you actually have a lot to say.
Right.
We just don't do that often in our culture. We don't sit there and sniff stuff and talk about it. But yeah, I'm always surprised. I learn a lot when I teach those classes from people and their
there's sort of no wrong answer, right?
No, there's not. Yeah.
I guess it's very much like wine. Yeah. So let's talk about beans for a minute. And you're like, how do you go about sourcing a coffee bean?
Yeah.
Like, how do you get linked up with farmers? How do you go to Guatemala and visit a coffee plantation?
Yeah.
How does it work?
So it's very nuanced based on the country you're purchasing from. So each country has its own way of doing export.
Is there a lot of politics involved in it then? Yeah, I figured. Yeah.
Specifically places in Africa, or if you're in a war-torn country like Yemen, you're talking interesting ways to get coffee. I would say Latin America, South America are the easiest. And honestly, for us, that's the easiest because it's of location, right? Like but really like how we started with building those relationships was with roasters that we had worked with prior to roasting. And they basically passed on those relationships and said, hey, here's someone we know in this country of origin. For example, the Menendez family we've been buying from in El Salvador since 2011. We've sold their coffee in our cafes since 2009. They are a family that has their own export license and their own import license into the United States. That's very, very uncommon to have a completely direct relationship with a producer. I like to use the word relationship coffee. So we like to buy and link up with importers that can help us purchase the same coffee, roughly the same farms or lots year in, year out for quality. So we work with like different importers. Like we work with one that's out of Europe that does a lot of our sourcing for African coffees we bring in.
It's just easier, right?
It's just easier. Then they have people that are scouting on the ground. They're exporting that coffee. They can go to those auction lots, maybe in Kenya. Right. It's a very different system. It's very heavily regulated, let's say, for example, in Kenya through the government, also with Ethiopia. So it just completely depends on the country of origin that you're working with. So that's actually a really huge and complex question because it totally depends.
I knew it was going to be. And I knew that there was some politics involved in it also. Yeah.
But our goal is to like find the right size producers that work for the type of coffee quality that we're looking for and to try to work with them year in and year out if we can. We always get type samples sent to us every harvest. So we get those samples sent to our lab. Winston sample roast them. We cup them. We approve them for purchase or not. And so coffee is very seasonal. Our goal is to use the coffee before it's a year old after harvest.
I never even thought about it.
And so, like Colombia has 2 seasons, but most countries we buy from have 1. And so, if people are like right now, we have a couple of people that are like, well, why don't you have Ethiopian coffees? And we're like, well, they're not in season yet. They will ship for us come May, June. And it doesn't mean that coffees on the shelf that you see aren't good. It's just we try to use them before they're a year old. Some people will use coffees 1 to 2 years old after harvest. The problem with that is they can start to show signs of age, just like anything else. And as a Q grader, I'm very sensitive to that. Winston is very sensitive to that.
What happens to the flavor once it gets to start to dissipate like anything else? Or is it like a spice where, after it gets old, it's not going to be as potent?
Yeah, like the acidity will start to kind of fall off. The flavors can sometimes taste papery, woody. They can have moisture content issues that can also cause some bacterial things to happen.
Is that a bacteria? Is that one of your biggest problems? Is something you're looking for?
We assess moisture content when we purchase coffee. We have a little meter that we test our coffees for. If Winston is noticing the humidity is going up, we will try to work through that coffee really fast because we know that will decrease the shelf life really quickly. So it's a balance of all those things. We test those samples when they come in, and we test them as we're using them as well, because that will also impact how he roasts the coffee.
You comfortable?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah? Okay, right.
So that's something that Winston is much more of an expert in than
Winston's
I am.
a person. I feel like Winston's some supercomputer that you have in the back. Like, oh, Winston, hello, Rachel,
Yes.
how are we today?
Yeah, well, he's like our executive chef of coffee.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah,
that's his job, and it's a big role. And but he's always looking for sourcing the best coffees for the timeline. Make sure that we have coffees year round, that we have a good selection, that we have fresh crop coffees going into our blends. We'll get sometimes 20, 30 samples in from a country and pick one, and you're just like, you're cupping through all these things, and it just takes a lot of time.
So so take us on a journey of, because I feel like a lot of people just don't understand coffee. I think that we understand you go to a shop, you order after 4 minutes, 5 minutes, depending how busy it is, you start wondering. So take us through the journey of the bean growing, being picked, and going to the cup of coffee.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Okay. If there's enough time, you could paraphrase
we were talking
a lot
about
of
like
it.
How we want to do like a really fast reel or something about this, because it is.
Yeah.
So, truly it's coffee.
There's a fermentation process that happens, correct? Or no?
Yeah. So there's, coffee is it's basically grown on it looks like a bush almost. So it flowers, and those flowers turn into buds. And then those cherries have to ripen. So they have to be picked by hand when they're fully ripe.
And they're green, right?
They go from green to yellow to red,
right, okay.
Depending on the varietal. There could be a pink varietal, a yellow varietal.
Oh, wow.
There's a lot of different varietals within coffee, but it has to be picked by hand ripe. And so typically a plant will have maybe 4 or 5 pickings per season. So pickers will go out, pick again, pick for ripeness. The later the harvest of the picking, usually the sweeter the cup and the more complex the cup. So then it's picked as a whole cherry, and it's like 2 little seeds inside that cherry. And there's 3 primary categories for processing. You have fully washed coffees, you have semi-washed coffees or honey processed coffees, and then you have natural processed coffees. And so fermentation happens in a fully washed coffee. You're washing the cherry off. You're taking the skin off, the mucilage. It's still inside this little wrapper. It's almost like a cellulose type material called parchment. And you're fully washing all that sugar and stickiness and fruit off of the coffee. And then you're putting it into a tank to ferment. Anywhere from 8 hours to 24 hours, depending on this is where it gets wild.
Yeah.
Temperature of the location of where that processing plant is, and what the producer is looking for in the cup quality. So that's all very different, right? Fermentation happens different rates, different temperatures.
Sure. The washing though has to do with the flavor also, though, correct?
Yeah. So that'll kind of give it like the cleanest flavor. Then there's what's called semi-wash or honey, which is where the exterior of some of the fruit is removed, but that mucilage, the tacky, sticky stuff, is left on the seeds, and then it's dried. And so again, with fermentation, it could be layered thick or thin. You could have a lot of mucilage, a little bit.
Jesus
it's like
Christ.
wild. And again, it depends on how fast it oxidizes.
This is so much more complicated than wine, huh?
Like there's 5 different ways in Costa Rica. They have different honey processes. They have white honey, yellow honey, red honey, black honey. Like they have all these different.
Wow.
And then you have natural process. And natural is where you are just basically fermenting it almost like in the whole cherry. And again, with naturals, it's very risky because you don't want to have too much bacteria. But basically you have where you layer it on a raised bed or on the ground, how thick or how thin the layer is, how often are you raking the cherries. So there's more risk with naturals, and there's a lot of labor involved in natural process. But for example, in Yemen, that's all they do. They don't have water. So you only get natural processed coffees from Yemen. Then there's all these other experimental things that producers are doing after the wine industry. So, all these kind of fun, wild fermentation things that people are trying in different tanks. And it's just crazy. But those are the three primary processes. Then that coffee sits typically 60 days and rests. And then it goes through what's called a dry mill. And the dry mill is where a lot of quality happens. So then that parchment it's going through this machine that's taking the parchment off.
The parchment is
that cellulose structure
what is
that's
it
kind of
called?
like it's called parchment, and then it's what protects the coffee while it's being dried down to humidity of 10 to 12%.
Yeah. What is the shell then on the outside? That's called something that they sell. Matthew was using them to make infusions.
That is the actual cascara. That's the cherry. That's the cherry. That's the skin.
Yes. Okay, the skin. Yeah, right. There's a market for the skins now too.
There's a market for that. So then it sits for 60 days, typically at origin, and then it goes to the dry mill. And dry mill is where it's sorted for screen size. So you want those beans to be sorted for size. So when you're selling to a roaster, you want it to be very similar in size. There's machines.
Why is that important?
So when you're roasting,
everything is
evenly, roasting and drying out the same way. And roasting the same way. So you have screen size. And then there's all these different machines that are used for quality. So there's a machine called an Oliver machine, and it basically shakes the coffee. It has air pushing up. And
I've seen videos of that.
If the coffee is not dense, it means it's probably a defect. So it's sorting the defects out, and you're trying to
crystals.
Yeah, it goes to Folgers. Well, all of it goes somewhere. It all gets used.
It has to, right? Yeah.
And so there's a whole quality control thing that happens at the dry mill, and then it's bagged in bags, and it's put in jute bags then that we get, and then
those
it's
are the big
ready
sacks,
for export.
right? Big huge sacks, and then it gets shipped on a boat. Or
so then it goes to export, and it goes on a ship, and gets loaded onto containers. Then we receive it here through the importer. They unload it. It's in their warehouse. They tell us, "Hey, you're ready." So then,
but at this point, it's not roasted.
It's not
roasted, right?
Nope, it's just green coffee.
So what if you were to make a coffee with that? What would happen? You couldn't.
Green coffee?
Yeah, you couldn't, right?
It is so dense. It would screw up your grinder so bad. Which we've had kind of get into our hoppers every once in a while, and you're like, oh, I hit an unroasted coffee bean, it'll just it'll torque the whole burr set. And then we receive it green, put it in our warehouse, and then it goes into the roaster. And then that's a whole thing. Winston sets up different profiles for how we roast those coffees. So they each have their own set of profiles depending on its processing. If it's a natural process, it usually has a lot more natural sugar on the outside. So you don't want to burn it. You have to start a lower drop temperature. There's a whole thing with rate of rise of temperatures. I am not a roaster, so I can follow directions, but I am not like him. He has an understanding of how to profile those coffees in such a way that bring out the best balance between acidity, sweetness, flavor, and the sugars that we want to see in those coffees. So then we roast it, but we also cup it. So before we send any of our coffees out, we go through a quality control process where we're dialing that new coffee in on the roaster, making sure that it is hitting all of those things that we want, and how it comes together in the cup is good. And
so when you say cupping, you're actually making a cup of coffee. Is that what
we're doing the quality control process that we call cupping.
Yes.
And if in that process we're not excited about how that coffee is coming through, Winston will go back and reprofile the coffee. And then we'll take that information, and because the goal is we want that coffee to translate very well to the cafes. So it's easy for the baristas to work with. It's soluble. It's consistent.
Yeah, consistency has to.
If something is wacky with the coffee in the cafe, usually the first thing we check is how did that profile go? So it's sort of this.
What would be some examples of something going wrong, in the cafe? What would you say? The way we're looking at, you're talking about flavor, correct? Or?
Flavor, yeah. I mean, we cup all our stuff before it goes into the cafe. So like usually that's why we have the quality. So we cup 4 or 5 days a week.
Yeah. And
our roaster, Winston, and his team of production roasters cup all those production roasts. So it's a lot of cataloging of roasting, or of cupping, sorry.
Yeah.
And so if nothing will go out into the cafe or onto the retail shelf unless it has gone through our quality control check. Mm-hmm. So typically we don't find any major issues. I would say that early on in the roasting process, this was a thing that we were constantly trying to figure out. Is this a how we're making it in the cafe thing, or is this a roasting thing?
Interesting. Yeah.
And we really had to dial in roasting to get the end product to be like really consistent for not only our baristas, but we want all our customers to buy a bag of coffee with confidence, knowing that it's easy to take home and brew.
Yes.
If it's not easy to brew, then we've not done our job. Mm-hmm. So that is all of the steps.
Whew.
Then we train the baristas on how to do their jobs. So,
how did they figure this out? How did they figure out looking at this bush? Like, back
let's take these seeds and roast them.
Back when, people were walking around in Guatemala and say
they toasted them in pans.
It's a lot. It sounds like the process of chocolate.
I mean, Ethiopia is the birthplace of coffee. Mm-hmm. They believe also potentially parts of Yemen too.
Not in South America.
No, the plant made its way via the Europeans.
Yeah,
the
of
French.
Course, yeah, spice trade.
Got it there.
Yeah.
So no, it is. Its home is that Horn of like that. Not the Horn of Africa, but like basically that part of like Yemen, Ethiopia, like that side. And in Ethiopia, there's thousands of varietals that exist that do not exist in other parts of the world.
So how do you think somebody just came about it and was like,
well, I mean, legend is they like...
Yeah, what's legend?
The legend is like the goats were eating the cherries and they were dancing and like why? And they're getting kind of high from these...
Checks out.
But then
totally checks out.
I mean, the fruit itself is actually very sweet and
you can eat
palatable.
It raw.
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
And then the seeds, though, are very dense. And so,
it's like an olive, then you'd say. Well, no, because you can't eat an olive off a tree.
I'm trying to think of like what to compare it to. It's really, really dense. It's like almost impossible to chew with your teeth.
Yeah.
But in Ethiopia, the tradition was to toast it in a pan. Mm-hmm. And that's where roasted coffee came from. And that's still like part of the tradition in Ethiopia is to roast coffee over an open flame. Mm-hmm. And you'll see that whole coffee tradition and ceremony happen where they will toast the coffee over an open flame and then they'll grind it and sometimes with spices and serve it in an ibrick, which is like the Turkish kind of style.
Is that what I was just going to ask you? Is that where they have the big thing of hot sand? You ever see those?
It's basically just like really finely ground coffee with water and just cook it and then stir, like just basically you pour the top off.
Right. Yes. I think I love watching those videos. Yep. Can you do anything with the leaves of the coffee plant?
That's a great question. I mean, I
think they probably would have figured it out by now, right?
Yeah, I don't know that that's like other than composting them now. I don't think they're edible. I've never eaten one.
Eat one.
I'll try next time.
Yeah. You said about your coffee classes. I was all set to take one of your classes, one of the cold brew classes. I actually signed up for it and actually paid for it. And the day before I was set to go, I got COVID.
Oh,
I was like so bummed.
Oh,
and then I haven't like had a chance to go back, but eventually I'm going to take your.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's not that hard, but I feel there's some nuances that I'm missing, and now that I'm such like a coffee nerd, I just want to be better at it.
Yeah.
The same way like I read that you taught yourself how to do latte art. Because obviously there was no.
I taught myself with
what
YouTube.
was the trial and errors of like trying to like what was your point of reference? Like I mean it's easy to make the heart. Like it's the first thing you learn in French pastries is you take creme anglaise sauce, you take raspberry sauce, you make a little dot, and you take a toothpick and you just run it through. So that the heart is probably I've never made a latte in my life, but I'm guessing the heart's the easiest thing.
It is. It's the easiest one. Yeah. I mean, no, the classes are great because, I mean, again, our goal is to demystify this whole thing and to be able to allow people to feel really successful when they go home making coffee. Like, there's nothing worse than asking someone, hey, like, pay $24 for this bag of coffee and go home and then be really disappointed with your experience.
Yeah.
And so there is, even in the brewing process, I think the biggest two things that are overlooked in home brewing is water quality is number one for me. And number two is grind quality. That the grinder is more important most times than the actual brewer itself.
That's interesting.
The grind quality, like the particle distribution size. If it's very inconsistent, you're gonna have some coffee that's over extracted in flavor and you're gonna have sour and bitter at the same time, which is not good.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah, because you'll have tiny fines that are over extracting, and you'll have these boulders that are sour and under extracting, and then you have like both sides of the spectrum in the same cup.
Sounds like terror. Sounds gross.
It is gross, but it is the number one common item, I think, in the home setup that is overlooked. People will spend so much money on the brewer. I'm like, no. Spend way more money on the grinder. Should be the other way around.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then also just water quality.
Water quality is super important. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it is your solvent. It is like the thing that is going to take all the goodness of the coffee out of there and transfer it into the cup. If it's not balanced and made for coffee, because there is a whole science behind coffee water, then it doesn't taste great.
Why is not there some college course that you could take? This seems like this would be like a 4-year degree.
There is one there's a couple.
I mean, this is
places.
so. I mean, I knew it was scientific. I wasn't like unaware that coffee is a science and the fermentation and different flavor profiles. I'm a chef and this is what I study.
Yeah.
But just talking to you in the last half an hour, I had no idea that it was this complicated, and every aspect of the bean's journey
is very complicated.
Has very complicated to begin with, but then also has something to do with the flavor. And then you finally get the beans, you finally grind them the right way, and now we're talking about water. It's like, when does it end, man?
It doesn't. But just like with beer brewing, right? People are very picky about how they procure their water.
Yes.
Or with baking, I know that water chemistry is really important to doughs. It's
a science.
100%.
It's all a science,
the water influences how the coffee tastes in your cup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is your day-to-day at Crema?
My day-to-day is very different now than it was the first 15 years. I have stepped back from working on the floor altogether, which was like a really hard transition for me because personally I miss it.
Did you feel you had no purpose? Like,
what's that?
Did you feel you had no purpose anymore? Like
a little bit.
Yeah, from so many years of working service and getting up and setting your goals and having your lists, and now I don't know what to do.
I miss making things with my hands.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing that I miss is like the making of the coffee and being with people and being with our team. And I'm with them, but just in different ways. But also it's given me a different perspective to be able to look back and be like look at it and say, oh, this place can stand alone on its own now without me every day. And that is a huge success in my opinion.
Great success as a business owner.
We have great leaders, we have great people that work for us, and they are heavily invested in the ethos of our company and who we are as a company. And I'm really grateful to them to be allowed to do what I do. I feel so honored to work with them, and they're all so talented in their own ways. And so having learned I don't have to be an expert at everything and I can let go of that is actually kind of freeing in a way at this point. So my day-to-day looks a lot like meeting with our different teams, our different team leaders, our roasting team, our marketing team, our ops team, and just talking about here's what we want to do and here's our goals for this quarter, and hey, let's focus on this part of the business, or hey, we'd love some new drinks, or hey, this coffee over here is really cool and unique and we have a great opportunity to share the story. So it's a lot of those things as an owner that I was so busy doing that I wasn't able to kind of take a step back and think about the bigger picture things, which now is what I'm able to do.
Right on.
So
well, that's a great step for being a business owner, right?
Yeah.
Like if you can not be there and the place still runs just as good if you were, I mean, hats off, you know?
Yeah.
Let's talk about flavors for a second, especially like syrups. And I see some of these orders, especially at like a Starbucks, it's like, it's not even a coffee anymore. It's like a dessert, you know? How did syrups wind up in coffee? Like if you want to talk about just being a purist of coffee, you figure you just drink it, you grind the beans, you drink it, you taste it, you want to experience the coffee. But now we have lavender, vanilla, I mean, pumpkin spice. I mean, it's fucking out of control. Like I feel in my very little knowledge of coffee, like you're masking the flavor of the coffee or making it more palatable. Like how did syrups make their way into our everyday coffee life?
Well, I think syrups, I mean, when I started in coffee was really bitter.
Yeah.
And like we didn't have these really nice, sweet, balanced flavor profiles that we've learned so much more about, and through science of better coffee quality from producers and better roasting methods and techniques, and honestly a lot of like scientific things that we've learned about roasting coffee over the last 10, 12 years. There's been a lot of advancement there. I think that you needed syrups to sell coffee for a while.
Yeah.
And I think that it's like people want to treat themselves. And so like truly with espresso drinks, when you're going out and it's not something you're going to make in your home, it's like, well, this is something different and unique that I can't necessarily get at home. And so syrups, when we started at Crema, we only had 3 to start, and we got a lot of feedback that was not appropriate. We needed more. But it's interesting. It's kind of gone in a circle and a wave, but the New York Times has actually put out a couple of articles in the last 6 to 9 months about syrups and specialty drinks and like iced coffee with like cold foams and all this is like huge in coffee. And it's like now, and even within like data within Starbucks, that they sell more iced coffee than they do hot coffee. And some of the articles are like, is hot coffee going away? But a lot of it has to do around the proliferation of these like fun new beverages people are releasing on TikTok and these reels and like, and it has to do with like the adoption of that with people under the age of 30, which is really interesting. And so for me, I feel like there was like this purist part of me for the longest time about coffee, and there still is. Like I don't drink a specialty drink every day, but on my way here, like what
is your go-to specialty drink?
Well, like right now we have one called the Spring Vacation. It's like a grapefruit syrup. It's like an espresso tonic with some fever tree tonic in it and mint. And it's so good. I'm just like, this is really good on like a hot day. Like today's not hot, but like, it's a nice little treat, right? And to me, like that's like its own thing, different from like drinking the hot black coffee or that straight espresso shot. But I think that like there's always going to be a space for that. It's just like the cocktail world where it's like, yeah, you've got these amazing spirits, and certain ones you're like, yeah, I'm not going to put that in that cocktail. Like that's not worth it. Same thing with coffee. Like there are some coffees that we serve that I'm like, no, that is a super fancy processed whatever coffee, or you know, rare varietal. That's not going to end up in a latte. So there is a time and a place for every coffee. Like I do believe that. And so I am like, if you want a sweet drink, and a lot of times for us, it's like the gateway for people. They are like, oh, I really love this. I really love this vanilla latte. Why is it? It's so good. Like it's not that sweet, and now I'm going to take the syrup out and just have an iced latte. Oh, now I'm going to just try a straight espresso.
Yeah.
Like I've seen that of evolution for certain customers, which is just really fun. But then there's those people that I'm like, that's what you want. I'm gonna make it delicious. You're gonna love it.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna bend on our integrity of our standards to have a fun drink. So it's important to the profitability, honestly, of our business, but also I believe that you can find that balance between being like offering really solid, awesome coffees, but then being a place that you can offer someone who maybe is new to specialty coffee.
Sure, right.
And like
it's intimidating,
is
right?
like, I want us to be that welcoming, warm place where everyone has a place to come in and get something that they want and like, hopefully. And if that means the evolutionary change for them is to go into like drinking straight shots of espresso or having that, single origin coffee, that's great.
Yeah.
But there's a place for everyone.
It's kind of like when I'm at a steakhouse, I have the urge to order a big dirty martini. But then when I'm at like a place like Attaboy, it's not even in the realm of possibilities. Yep. So it's kind of like place and time also. So when are we going to see the crema frappuccino, caramel frappuccino latte on the menu?
It's funny. We've always joked about it because...
You're buying blenders? I got somebody that can sell you blenders. So let me know when you're ready.
Well, I mean, like one of my favorite coffee heroes, and I met him very briefly in his shop in Boston, is George Howell. And George Howell is really like the grandfather of specialty coffee. You should go listen to the interview that he does with David Chang.
Is he Australian?
No.
Okay.
He's from the US.
Okay.
But David Chang does a really interesting podcast interview with him. It's very fascinating. But George Howell is responsible for the Cup of Excellence program, which is rewarding coffee producers for really high scoring coffees. But as far as like roasted coffees and a go-to place where I purchase coffee outside of Crema, I buy a lot of George Howell coffees. But when you go into his cafes in Boston, like he kind of invented the Frappuccino sold that recipe to Starbucks. And then he does serve a version of it in his cafe. And I'm like, there is a good way. There is a right way to make a frozen blended drink. Yeah. And I have a recipe from the early 2000s that I made for one cafe I worked in. But I don't imagine us doing that anytime soon because of the volume. It's too difficult to manage the blender station.
Yeah, right, the blender station. Oh man, I don't get the schedule. Oh man, I'm on the blender station this week. So there is definitely like, I am not super anti when I see that stuff. I think there's a way to do it well. But we have not broken into that realm. That's funny. Please call me when you do. I want to be the first.
Okay.
Can you explain what crema is to us and where the name? I mean, the name comes from So, guys, explain what that is.
Yeah, I mean, so I feel like it was a different era for me when we named Crema.
I think it's a great name,
but like, it was like everyone kind of knew, like, oh yeah, back in the mid 2005, 2008, it was like. And this is kind of speaking to that period too, but it was like, oh, all about the quality of how you brew that espresso and the crema that it has on top, which is like, so oh, it's a good sign of like how well you extracted the coffee.
It's like talking to people about weed. I'm like, I don't care, man. I just want some fucking weed.
Yeah. But I mean, truly, and then now the argument is like, oh, the crema is the bitter part of the shot, so you want to take that off or whatever. There was that whole movement too.
Yeah.
But for me, it was like, oh yeah, it's like a common marker sign of like a quality shot of espresso, and it's an Italian word. And so I liked it because it just kind of spoke to, I'm Italian, my heritage. So it was like, oh yeah, that kind of speaks to my heritage as, an Italian American. And then also just like what quality espresso can be. And so we named it Crema, and then when we started roasting, we did a little bit of a rebrand and called ourselves Crema Coffee Roasters. Interesting enough, there are a lot of cremas now that have opened in other cities, so it's a little difficult because we have not had the ability to trademark it.
You can't trademark that. You can't trademark milk or sugar commodities. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah,
because it's interesting, but that was where the name came from.
Interesting. Are you having any staffing issues with the what's happening in the world? Like, I feel like being a barista is a very specific thing. Someone's just not going to be like, well, I need a summer job, I'm going to go be a barista. And especially like what you're expecting and the program that you put these people through.
We have not found hiring to be a huge problem for us. Again, we want to take care of our people as best as we can. And I think like having our well-being benefits that we offer and our approach to how we hire and onboard and train our people is uniquely a little bit different. And so we have not had an issue with staffing. And of course, there's always things that happen with like, but for me, like I don't ever see us hiring. I hope people learn something about themselves at Crema, and I hope that when they leave, that they go on to do something that they truly love. And I'm happy to always assist people in whatever that step is. And so I feel like there's always going to be people that are like, oh yeah, I'm coming in for like a good job that'll, I'll be here for a year or two. And then there's some people that are like, no, I actually want to work in coffee, like maybe beyond that, So I think there are always different people in different places, and I'm supportive of those places.
Yeah, that's great.
So I hope that, we are, I don't know, just fully taking care of our people in the best way possible. And so we have not seen a huge staffing issue for
you.
us.
Why are espressos served with a lemon peel?
That's an Italian thing.
Yeah.
And I have seen it done both ways, like served with it or without. The lemon is kind of bitter.
Super bitter.
And a lot of times people will actually, and Italian espresso is its own thing. Italian espresso is very different than how we approach espresso as far as like the components, the quality of the coffee that's in that espresso, how it's roasted, how it's brewed. And it has its own flavor profile. And I'm not saying anything good or like, it's not that it's a bad thing. It's just very different.
What's different about what we know about espresso from Italian espresso?
So Italian espressos typically have Robusta coffee, which is a different species of coffee in it.
There's different species of coffees.
Yes,
Gee, you left that part out in the travel from the bean to the cup.
We only serve Arabica.
Oh my god!
But typically there's Robusta, which has a lot of bitterness and bite to it.
So let me put a pause. Let's go on a side mission.
Yeah.
You cannot take espresso beans are their own thing, right? Or they're coffee beans.
No, I would say
when I go to Crema and I want to buy coffee beans, there's also espresso beans. So what is the like?
Well, we have blends,
yes.
And our blends are designed for the brew method of espresso. But you could brew those coffees on any device you would want.
Okay.
So no, like.
So even though it says espresso, I can make cold brew out of it.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, I didn't know that.
So they're all the blends are. We have wholesale accounts that use our blends for their drip coffee. So you can do it both for drip, but we are thinking about espresso in terms of how we put those components in there when we build those blends. But there are some people that will say, well, this is only designed for espresso, so they might roast it differently. They might have different components in there. Espresso or Italian culture has different makeup of species and varieties that they put in their coffee, but they also roast it pretty different and prepare it pretty different. And so it has a little bit of a like higher acidity and bite to it.
Then why would you add a lemon to that?
I don't know. I mean, I honestly,
it's fucking
I'll be
weird,
honest,
right?
like that would be something I would need to research.
Yeah.
I don't know that I have the exact origin answer for you on that.
Get back to us on that.
Sometimes we have people that request that and we're like, sure, we'll do it for you. Ugh. I personally don't like it.
I don't like it either. Yeah. I don't understand it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's next for you guys? Are you working on any other new projects? Like where do you see yourself in 5 years?
We're hoping to open, so we're opening a location in Brentwood this summer in July. Hoping to target other locations in the Nashville area in the next 3 to 5 years. I want us to grow smart, which doesn't always mean fast.
Correct.
And I mean, gosh, we have 2.5 if you count Pinewood, but it's like we have 2 locations. It took us 15. Like now we're making a move to open another one. Yeah. I don't anticipate us taking that long. But my goal is to make sure that as we do take steps to grow by retail outlet, that we can maintain our integrity and who we are as a company. That's like the thing that I constantly am like thinking about, that we don't lose our culture, we don't lose our reputation for quality, that we are mindful of the people that we bring into the company. And so I would love to see us open a couple more locations. I'm also interested in being places where there isn't a lot of specialty coffee. I think there's a lot more competition in Nashville, which is great. And there's definitely room for growth for more coffee in the city. But like, I'm excited to kind of look in the places that maybe aren't expected. And I mean, we have, there's other ways we can grow with wholesale and online and classes.
Sure. Yep. I think the classes are great. It's a genius idea. Yeah.
And we're hoping to offer some of those in our Brentwood location as well, because they are so fun and popular. And we enjoy teaching them and doing them. So I would love to see us grow more retail outlets, but I want to be conscious of the decisions that we don't put anything else at risk before growth.
I mean,
I don't want to risk our current businesses for the sake
that's
of...
any growth plan. Everybody thinks about that.
Yeah.
It's really easy to open a restaurant and have all these beautiful, shiny objects dangled in front of you. And I can't even staff this place. How am I going to staff these 5 others? So being smart about it, I think it's a really smart idea. Rachel, we covered a lot.
Yeah.
My mind's blown. I had somewhat of an idea, and now it's just like I'm so underwater with the coffee. Thanks for taking your time and sharing us from the development of a bean all the way down to the cup and leaving out certain key aspects of what espresso is.
I mean, I'm like, you want to really talk about
this is
that?
Gonna be you're gonna be a recurring guest. It's all we're gonna do is talk about coffee. But, by the way, I forgot to mention. If somebody wants to find you and find Crema by your coffee, where do we do that at?
Yeah, I mean, we sell coffee online, crema-coffee.com. We ship 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. You can buy our bulk coffee, retail coffee online. We also have a list of wholesale partners that are on our website. Turnip Truck, West Nashville and East Nashville sell our retail coffee. But if you want it directly from us, the best way to do that is through our website.
Right on. What's that? What's the website?
Crema-coffee.com.
Excellent.
So crema-coffee.com. Yeah.
Thank you for spending your afternoon with us.
Yeah.
It was an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.